Hello and welcome to the official Scottish Rugby podcast, coming to you all the way from Japan as we get ready for the Rugby World Cup 2019. On the episode this week, we sit down with Dr James Robson MBE to look back at an amazing career at Scottish Rugby. Plus, I sit down with Chief Executive Mark Dodson to discuss the Nagasaki partnership and the future of the game.
Well, here we are. We're in Nagasaki, Japan for our first podcast on the road, and I'm delighted to have with us today Dr James Robson MBE. Dr James, how are you?
Yeah, it's my honour to be here, Jamie. Finally.
We've worked so hard. We've tried so hard to get you in the podcast.
Busy man.
He's a busy man. He's a busy man.
But people to fix.
But we've got him on. We're all here. We're going to talk about the World Cup. But Doc, wanted to ask you about this. This is now, I think, how many World Cups have you been involved in now?
Yeah, this is my seventh.
Seventh World Cups. Wow. When you think back to your first World Cup you're involved in, what are the memories of that? What was it like for you taking part in your first one?
91 was special for me because I had first joined Scotland as physiotherapist in 91, going on the tour to Canada and the States, and I just thought that was a one-off. And when I came back, it emerged that the guy that I'd covered for moved to Rangers Football Club at the time, and that opened up a space, and clearly I didn't do anything too bad on tour, so I was asked if I was available for the World Cup. And to do the World Cup and to be based in Scotland and to be working with absolute legends of the game was just a dream come true for me.
Chris, were you there in 91?
Steady. I was there. I was at the schoolboy enclosure at the south end, clock end. I remember, but that World Cup was special as well.
It was just
because it was here, but
yeah,
semi-final and the quality Grand Slam winning team prior to that. Well, the year before as well.
Well, that was the pleasure and the honour for me. Was I'd been watching these guys from the stands the year before, and then to be actually working with them was just amazing.
And was it the same, James? Was everybody in camp together for a prolonged period of time?
Yeah, no, I absolutely similar format, but of course, those were the amateur days, so you were giving up your employment, you were giving up your time with the family, but the camaraderie was just the same as it is now. The training was a little longer, if perhaps a little less intense, because it was spread out. We had some good fun. There's some stories you can't tell.
I was going to say, you say the same, but I can't imagine that JJ, Gavin and those boys were on Instagram.
No. I mean, we go back to touring in those days. You used to send a postcard. People may remember that's a bit of card with a few letters on it, and you stick a stamp on it. The boys just laugh at me when I talk about that now. We occasional, you were allowed to make one phone call home. You got a wee allowance to phone home. You had to go and dial all sorts of numbers and hope you get through, and then you'd be on a couple of minutes and you were off. So it truly was.
It sounds like a prison.
It wasn't a prison. We absolutely loved it. At least you had isolation works in both ways. When you're on tour like that, there's very little distraction apart from what's happening locally. But at the same token, the families back home really relish getting that contact. So it was special. Now there's no escape. The phone just goes constantly.
Yeah. Instant and I suppose you guys have been involved in numerous tours as well, and they've been involved, and probably the start of the internet coming through, maybe in '99, Mossy, when you were involved. It must have changed from the start of the time to when you finished.
Yeah, totally. I remember 1999 was my first World Cup as a player, and we had I think it was Sony Ericsson or whoever at the time had one of the sponsors or World Cup sponsors, and I think they gave the squad of 30 of us, there was 3 phones in the team room, 3 mobile phones, and it was like if you wanted to make a call, you just hoped that no one else was borrowing the phone at that point. So there was kind of 3 between the whole squad, and then kind of year after we toured New Zealand, and it was still using phone cards to phone home and stuff. And I suppose there was an incentive to reach a bigger incentive to reach the knockout stages, because your postcard would be home. Well, you'd be home before your postcard if you didn't reach a quarter final in those days.
I think it changed for us as well. That like the young lads that came in and it was just the internet, they were phoning home like every day. Like Max Evans used to be on the phone home about 4 or 5 times a day. He'd be sitting at a dinner table on his phone. But I do remember we toured Fiji and Samoa, I think 2013, and it was limited data, James.
Yeah.
You'll remember this. So when you're in the team room, only place you could get Wi-Fi was in the team room, and it was limited data. So a lot of the guys were using it to phone home or to FaceTime the kids. But Donkey Weir didn't have kids at the time. Donkey Weir was using it to download YouTube videos. So Donkey Weir used up every bit of data there was one day, so we got nicknamed Gigabytes for the rest of the tour, and wasn't allowed on his laptop so that people could actually speak to their families. So it definitely has changed.
That had special connotations for me, because I was faced with being on tour when my eldest daughter Eleanor was graduating from university, and of course I was going to miss this special occasion. And the problem with this job is you do miss all special occasions. I've missed the girls having chicken pox. I've missed something like 18 of Emma's birthdays. Yeah. So, but for that, I was ever so grateful for the time difference, because it meant that at 2:30 in the morning, none of you guys were awake, and I was the only person on the internet, and I just managed to get the connection to St Andrews University just in time and watch the ceremony. And there wasn't a dry eye in the bedroom, I have to say, because that was a wonderful moment, and being able to see Eleanor live. Sometimes it's just meant to be.
I suppose that we're looking at the social aspect of phoning home, phone cards, phone boxes, internet, but on a professional level, it must make it easier having the connectivity. If you pick up an injury, say back in tours,
incredible.
to get contact with home and surgeons.
Mossy, we've already used it on this tour. One of the guys needed a scan. The local medics were absolutely superb. We got it in record time. They gave me their version. Of course, it was in Japanese with a translation, so there was some subtleties that I wasn't able to pick up. I was able to transmit that with an app that World Rugby have provided, and next minute I've got a detailed report by our own clinicians, our own surgeon, our own radiologist back home. That's the difference.
Oh, that's amazing. But you would have known what it was before.
I had an inkling.
The human scanner.
I use the excuse. I always say to the head coach. I always say to Gregor, look, I'm not a radiologist. This is just my opinion. So we'll need to wait. And he said, no, I'll take that.
You mentioned, James, about the tough parts of touring being what you miss at home. Would you say that's the hardest thing about being away for the prolonged periods that you're away for?
Yeah, and undoubtedly, actually, it's missing those special anniversaries, and sometimes you got to look at people missing childbirth, for instance. I'm very lucky to be at both Eleanor and Emma's births, but missing birthdays, missing special times, being over here is very difficult at times, and not just for the players. The players are younger, but many of them have got young families. But for the older guys like me, it still makes a difference. So, I always say that, quite often the plaudits come the way of those people who are touring, but the plaudits should really be going back home to those people who are supporting us, because without the support of Christine, my wife, the girls, my mum, just everybody, you couldn't do this job.
I suppose because of that, everybody's in the same boat, and you do build pretty special relationships when you're away. Some of those relationships get really quite deep, don't they, over a tour, and there are moments you do, obviously, maybe rock or some feel sorry for yourself. There's somebody there to help you along, isn't there?
That often manifests itself in a debt as well. I think Mr. Patterson, you're still owing me a wee trip.
I'm due James a trip on a luxury yacht in the Sydney Harbour from 2004.
Yeah. Haven't forgotten.
I hoped he had. No, we were touring.
We were in New Zealand.
New Zealand. We played Samoa in New Zealand, and I fractured my cheekbone, a triple fracture my cheekbone. I managed to get to Australia with the team, but I needed surgery, and we were on. It was a very seldom 1 day off a week, if that, maybe 1 day off every 2 weeks, and even less so for you guys.
And the doctor's lucky if he gets to go on that one day.
That's what I mean.
So I was really looking forward to this, Jamie. Luxury trip around the harbour with a picnic and then a trip to the zoo. Amazing, once in a lifetime.
I was on it, actually. It was brilliant, James.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, then James's phone went on the way to the luxury chartered boat round the harbour, and it was a surgeon in Australia said, listen, there's a space for Chris for his surgery. So James and I got dragged off the bus into a taxi, hooked to the hospital.
Next traffic lights, we just got unceremoniously, there's $20, get a taxi.
Very much appreciated. He was there to hold my hand.
But I think in those times, though, it must be great for you guys as players to have somebody like Doc.
It's
there
great.
who
It's great going for surgery in a foreign country.
'Cause you must have some experiences when you go to these foreign countries and they don't have the infrastructure or they don't have the resource, and you must have some stories around some of the things you've seen or heard in these environments.
Some sobering times when we were in Fiji last time, and one of the boys took unwell after the game, and we went off to the A&E to get a scan. You had people rocking up and taking their loved ones out of the back of cars with all sorts of horrendous injuries from car crashes and other things that I just can't mention on this podcast. And that really hit home, and it was hard enough for me, but I have to say it really rocked the player at the time, because they're just not used to seeing that kind of issue.
I think, Jamie, to your point, like the docs and medics as a whole, they sit in a unique position. They've got 100% trust from the players, 100% trust from the management, and at times that means you've got to play that middleman. So the relationship you build up with the docs, in particular, it's incredible. Like, so much of you can laying yourself out as a player. There's so much bravado involved in it. That, you're there to do a job, but you lay yourself out, you expose yourself to the doctors so that they know exactly what's going on all the time, and you trust that they're going to use that in a way that's not only good for you but good for the team overall as well. And I'm seeing examples of when James has stepped in and looked after me, and sure Chris has got exactly the same, but that would go across every single player that he's ever looked after, and that's why people have got so much respect for what he does as well.
Doc, I just want to go back a little bit. You mentioned you started in '90 the One World Cup. So was that? Do you say as a physio? That you started that role?
Yeah. Interesting. I started professional life as a physiotherapist, and I worked full-time physio for a couple of years in Edinburgh, and then decided I'd really quite like to go back and do medicine and combine the two. Never ever thinking that I'd get where I am today. This is dreamland. But I always thought that I could make a difference to working with my local club. Initially, I started off with Edinburgh Wanderers, played there, and then when I moved to Dundee, I had a year off. What I did was I continued to work as a physio in the holidays and stuff, and then I got a call out of the blue from North Midlands saying their last game they didn't have their sponge man, as it was in those days, to cover the game. Would I come and do it? Funnily enough, I think that was Mr. Leslie's last game for North Midlands. As it happened, I think we were playing the Borders, or the South, as it were in those days, and I got that, and then must have made a reasonable impression because I got invited back. So for several years I would do Dundee High School, FPs, and I would do the Northern Midlands, and then I got the call from Donald McLeod, who was the doctor at the time, saying that the physio that was due to go to Canada and the States couldn't go, and was I available? And it's quite funny because I was working in obstetrics and gynecology of all things at the time. Fantastic job, but quite different from rugby. And I had to go to my consultant and say, look, can I have all 3 of my weeks holiday off in Awana? And that just wasn't done in those days. Fortunately, he let me go, and then the rest is history.
And that was when was that?
That was May '91. We went to Canada.
So, and all the experience you had through club doctor and club physio until now, and everybody says, and it's quite rightly so, the game changes, the game evolves at an incredible rate. Everything changes. Without being too morbid or graphic, do the injuries change, or were there quite similar injuries back then to see what you know?
I would say that perhaps the number of injuries hasn't changed. The types of injuries have changed. We got a lot more muscle problems in those days.
Due to conditioning, maybe?
Sorry, yeah, I think it's the conditioning that's changed. Unfortunately, now we're seeing more joint disruption because of the height of the collisions, and certainly recognising more concussion. Now, if you listen to people talking about concussion, lots of people who play back in those, I remember being sparked, blah, blah, blah. And it was never truly recorded in the early days in the way that we recognise and remove now. So that's an important change.
But you've been a big important
perhaps a smidge. But, things, one of my jobs as physio was to cut up little bits of bandage so the boys could tie their socks up. before the start of the game. And I learnt so much coming in. Peter Dodds was captain of that tour, and Peter and Reedy, and all of these guys helped me immensely to adapt, because working with North and Midlands, going to Scotland was a step up. Now, perhaps not as big a step as you would see now, but people got to remember that if they want to get into this kind of work, easiest and best place to start is in their local club, and start off small and get the practical experience on a day-to-day, because I would never have known. I wasn't used to the guys needing the bandages to tie their socks up. Fortunately, there's better elastic in the socks now.
James, you mentioned concussion there. And sadly, Dave Denton has come out and announced that he's retiring from the game. He's a guy you'd worked with many times over the years. Yeah, no, I mean,
David's a lovely guy, and I'm really sorry to see him come out of the game in this aspect. However, he acknowledges he's had the best of care throughout, and unfortunately some people do succumb to injury, not just to concussion. Somebody might get a knee injury that changes their career, somebody might get an ankle injury, the likes of Tom Evans getting his neck injury. You just never know, and that's one of the things that people have to appreciate, that with professional sport, each game may well be your last game from an injury point of view. So, we wish David all the best for his future, and he has to make a decision for himself and for his family, as everybody does.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a great guy, very good player. Chris, you'd have played with him as well, but we're working closely with him to try and make sure that transition.
He was so unlucky. He got an injury that kind of knocked him back at one point, because people were very much talking about being a British lion. David's a fantastic player.
He worked hard at his skills as well, Dave. Remember, he was in the academy when I was at Edinburgh. He came over first, and he had that raw, natural aggression and power, but he worked really, really hard. Had a wee bit of time in the sevens, and he was at the point where he was kind of one of our national team's most important players for getting momentum, and cracking player. But we spoke to him recently, and he's working hard at what comes next.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the Goofy trilogy, I think. Him, Grant Gilchrist, and Matt Scott.
The Goofy trilogy.
Goofy trilogy.
Are they going into Disney?
Say what's this?
I think some of their antics off the park got them nicknamed that from their teammates. They weren't necessarily the most.
They used to live together, did they not?
Is that right?
In Stockbridge, or was that Tim Visser? Maybe not Kilco. I believe there was a time when they all lived together in Stockbridge. So I'm sure
some common sense was lacking at times in some decision making, maybe.
I think, that probably brings out a very important point, that, as well as continuing to hone your skills on the field, you've got to be mindful of the fact that injury may intervene, and therefore, we've now got the Rugby for Life system. We're trying to make sure that the youngsters, as they come through, balance work on the field with work off the field, because you need those qualifications to stand you in good stead going further forwards. You can't just rely on rugby connections. You've got to utilise your time. There was a period when I noticed that people were constantly on the likes of Game Boy. Other consoles are available. I just can't name them, but they'd have fantastic digital skills of playing games, and that was just a waste of time. I've seen that change. That's another change. I've seen that change, and now, likes of, I can't remember which tour we're on. Pete Horn's going off to some local university for invigilation, so while he's on tour, he's taking exams. That kind of thing happens all the time now, and great credit to the boys to be able to balance that academic stuff, the business stuff, along with the rugby.
And it's massively important, as you say, for the transition and what comes after rugby. I'm of the opinion it actually makes for better rugby players as well.
Yeah.
It makes them more settled in their own skin, and they can concentrate on the rugby when it's time to concentrate.
Well, it means I can have a decent conversation.
Mind you, that was table tennis, though, James.
Yeah, no,
you were a table tennis man over
it's
the
unfortunate.
console
Table tennis seems to have died off, because what I had to do was I had to change. So all of a sudden, I actually became quite good at killing zombies. And it has died off. But occasionally, if somebody does appear on the table tennis table, I loiter at the back, but it's very difficult to squeeze in now. I think they've heard, perhaps stories that I might be a little bit of a shark. Yeah.
Who's the best table tennis player you've played with over the years?
Well, Mike Blair wasn't too bad.
No, don't say
no, I've got to give him a plug.
No, Dan Parks was better.
Dan Parks was undoubtedly the best player I've ever played. I came within 2 points of beating him in one game, and that was
it's a victory.
My highlight.
As good as
easily.
There was two things you mentioned there, which was the Lions and Tom Evans, which I think we'll come to later on, Doc, because there's some stuff there we just want to chat about. But if
I thought this was over.
no, that was just the warm up done.
Table tennis table in head to head.
You mentioned about the kind of Rugby for Life and the players not really having maybe an idea of what they wanted to do. But I guess when you first started out in '91 and onwards, when the game was still amateur, and people still had jobs as well. So it must have been very different for you had guys coming in or guys going away, maybe with injuries, but they would have day-to-day jobs as well.
Yeah, no, we had farmers, we had plumbers, we had electricians, we had joiners, we had quantity surveyors. There was a whole paraphernalia, a whole wide range of aspects there. But whenever they came in, it was all about the rugby. But you knew that you had to be able to return them, to reasonable health to be able to earn a living.
Was that maybe more pressure then than it is now, or is
no? The pressure hasn't changed. You put pressure on yourself because you want to deliver the best service you possibly can, and that's the same for my colleagues, Stu Patton, Ali Little at the moment, the physios that are with us. We put pressure on ourselves. Other people don't pressure because we want to make sure that everybody is as fit as they can. Because ultimately, you want to be able to say to the head coach, you can pick the whole squad. Now, it rarely happens. Once we get into a tournament like this, there'll always be one or two people who are rehabbing, but delivering people to the best of their health is why we're here.
That medical team generally, a doctor and two physios as far as
on tour
touring's concerned.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to
when we first started out, it was a physio and a doctor, and quite often, because I was doubly qualified in the early days, perhaps for the bulk of the week it was me, and then the doc would come in at the end of the week for the game.
So I want to ask you who your favourite was, but you've built up some good relationships.
Undoubtedly, I'm in the company of my favourites. Jamie accepted.
And from a physio point of view,
from a physio point of view,
the relationships you've built up
I
over
think
the years.
One of the people I have, and I'd like to give a special mention, Stuart Barty. So many people, owe him a great debt of gratitude. I just see on Facebook that he's going back to work. He flippantly says minus a piece of bile. Barty had serious illness just over the last few months. And I wish him well, and I know he's making a great recovery, and he and his family deserve, a great credit for the way they've held their head up high and got on with it. And Barty used to be the joker. He was the guy before the Cookie Monster who actually did the magic tricks. The Cookie Monster, John Pennycook took over from him. I remember being absolutely entranced one night. Occasionally we do get out, and occasionally we might go for an alcoholic beverage, and he was doing this magic trick in front of me, and literally in front of my eyes. I couldn't fathom it at all. I really held him in awe, but he used to use that as a means of attracting perhaps a wider clientele in the name of some of the local ladies, and many of the boys would just follow on his his coattails. Really.
He once managed to get Bill Clinton in Dougie Morgan, the team manager's toilet in the hotel.
That was a classic.
He'd got a mannequin from one of the shops across the road, and somehow got a Bill Clinton mask.
Yeah, we got a Bill Clinton mask, and we put Dougie Morgan's number ones on him. So we had his blazer and stuff, and then we sat him on the toilet and give him a newspaper. And of course, Dougie Morgan comes in and opens the bathroom door. He recounts. He said, "Oh, excuse me," and then, thought, "How did I get into the wrong room?" It's that kind of thing. When 91 in the World Cup, the two biggest jokers, were number 9 and number 10. They'll remain nameless, Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Chalmers, but they would go and borrow, the ladder from the hotel and climb up first floor and turn people's, TV channels on to things that perhaps you would be embarrassed to see.
What about now, James?
Now
is that Ryan Wilson?
It's not the same. It's not the same, but Ryan Wilson has to be, at the bottom of everything. If there's something going on, it's going to be Ryan Wilson, or it's going to be Gordy Reid. Gordy Reid's a nightmare for me because he keeps sneaking up and pinching my ankles. Just he knows that I don't like sharp noises. He knows that I don't like frights, and he just plays on that. And then occasionally he'll come and he'll give me a bar of chocolate and say sorry, and then he'd start again the next day.
Or a chocolate or a bottle of red wine. That's the way to James's heart. Would that still be true?
Yeah, perhaps it's. I wouldn't like to say that, but all donations are great for the received.
Gordy, one day this week at training, there was a new liaison person for World Rugby, appointed to the team, and within minutes, Gordon was teaching him kind of Scottish slang words. So he taught him the Scottish slang word and says, "Wayne, say it to that boy over there." So this poor innocent kind of Japanese interpreter, so World Rugby official, Kaz,
nice guy,
lovely fella. I'll not tell you what he said to Ryan Wilson. But it was a Glasgow slang word that he taught him innocently, expecting a reaction from Ryan Wilson. That was Gordon Reid's doing. Yep. Within seconds, he would say this word to that man, see what happens. So he's good for squad morale.
They're great stories, and how important is it that you have these moments on tours?
It saves you sanity. You've got to have a laugh, because there can be so much pressure, and I dread illness and injury happening to anybody, but that's why I'm here, and to have those moments of release and to be able to then reminisce about them, and of course it creates this camaraderie, as Al said, and as Mossy knows, that stays you with forever. And Ian McGeechan, undoubtedly one of the best coaches. I've got to say that because of course I'm working with Gregor at the moment. Undoubtedly one of the best coaches I've ever worked with. He famously said about the Lions tour, and he said, look, you develop these bonds, and he said many years you maybe just see somebody across the street and there'll just be an exchange, a glance. And I think it's the same with with us. If I see, maybe don't see Mossy for 2 or 3 days, and then it's just as if you've met your old friend again. It's like Al's away doing all his business stuff, and whatever he does. I'm not entirely sure what he does, but occasionally when he makes an appearance, it's, "Hi, Big Al, how you doing?" And there's always a firm, generous, warm handshake or a hug. And
you talked about the Lions there. How did that come about? How did that start for you?
I was lucky because Geach was so 91 tour to Canada and the States was Dougie Morgan, Richie Dixon. They were the coaches. And it was really almost like a second team tour, because a lot of the big guys were being rested for the World Cup, and then Ian McGeechan and Jim Telfer were the coaches for the World Cup, and of course I met them and worked with them, and then Geach was appointed to the Lions, and very fortunate for me, obviously put in a good word, and in those days you didn't get a phone call, you didn't get a WhatsApp or a text, you got this amazing very formal letter inviting you to take up the appointment. Absolutely beside myself when that came 93. Through the post. 93. No, to New Zealand.
New Zealand, isn't it? Yeah.
And that was just incredible. That was incredible.
And did you think then that you would go on to do many more?
Oh, no. Again, like the World Cup in 91, the tour in 91, you just assume that that's it. You're going to get one shot. And then to be invited back one or two more times, just absolutely incredible. But that was a wonderful tour. Again, it was amateur, but it was professional, but contrast. We had the same sort of number of players. We took 36 players to on that tour. We got 31 with us here just now, but the management was 5. You had a manager, you had a head coach and an assistant coach, a doctor and a physiotherapist. Mm-hmm. I had Kevin Murphy, who was the England physio. Kevin used to take a nap sometimes in the afternoon. The boys would queue up for me. Well, I learned so much from Kevin, absolutely. And again, that's been the story of my career. You learn from people the whole time, and being on tour, you learn from people that you're meeting in foreign lands. Learning from the guys over here already.
Well, I need to ask you, because this is one of my first memories of you would be from the behind-the-scenes documentaries you used to do the Lions, especially 1987, and you featured in that. What was it like having a film crew at that time, kind of behind the scenes, filming everything? Was it quite? Was it from a medical point of view? Were you quite nervous about that?
No. Well, from I'd compare them to you. But
right.
there was 3 or 4 of them, because
you
Jamie just fits in, and you don't notice Jamie. until all of a sudden you see these marvellous videos appeering on YouTube and Scottish Rugby TV to name just a couple of channels. But these guys, this was a father who took out his pension money and invested in this, and he had his 2 sons and another friend, and they actually, as a small team, they became part of the team. So all of a sudden it just became seamless, and I think that was the magic of that particular video, and that's why it was so successful, because they were able to get in and see things and to get you to express emotions that perhaps you wouldn't do nowadays.
Yeah. And do you watch them back?
No. I've yet to. My daughters have not seen that end to end. They've seen snippets of it. But I remember there was an article came out in a Sunday newspaper, and basically it was decrying the fact that there were swear words in this video, and it was X-rated. And I got a phone call from one of my aunties saying, "I cannot believe the language that you use, James." You've got to remember, we're in a different environment here. So when I'm at home, when I was a GP, "Hi, Mrs. Smith, how are you doing?" You know, that you're very, very polite. If you're with the boys, sometimes, unfortunately, the vernacular slips because you have to emphasize in a way that they will understand. And if that's recorded, c'est la vie, but people out there have to understand that is the real world.
Yeah. Back to World Cups for me, seventh one. I suppose we've touched on 91, but you have some amazing memories of the 6 you've covered. Is there anything, if I was to ask you now, World Cup memory, what would be the one thing you go to, if there is one thing? Good,
I don't
bad,
think
indifferent.
there isn't really.
There's not one that jumps out at you.
There's not one that jumps out to me other than being at Murrayfield and really being crushed by the defeat against
91.
England, because that we had that in our power to be in the World Cup final.
Was that worse than 4 years ago, being at Twickenham at the last minute?
4 years was, in actual fact, now that you bring that up, I kind of erased that from my memory. No, 4 years ago was something that
It'd be similar,
it's similar, but I've never seen. And to have Twickenham become Murrayfield for a day, and it was like that, because the support from the sort of neutrals, I'm pretty sure, I mean, it just sounded like Murrayfield. And then to score, to go in the lead, and for it to start raining, everything was for us until that last moment. No, that was truly devastating. So we're dwelling on things that have hurt us. It's just been incredible just being here. And, things have changed. We had the welcome ceremony yesterday, absolutely fantastic. Who would have ever thought of putting boys in kilts and then subjecting them to 32 degrees of heat? What a training method, fantastic. Anyways, that was spectacular. But, in days gone by, they would actually ship all of the teams into the same venue. Right, so I remember in South Africa, 95. I was getting on a jumbo jet with three other teams. Just the 4 teams flew down to Cape Town to join with other teams, and then we're all in the same marquee, and I'm on a table with all the physios, the docs are on a table with the docs, and the players are interspersed with each other.
Before the tournament kicks off?
Yeah. And that was the welcome ceremony. Yeah. Fantastic.
And 95 would have been pretty special at that time.
It was, and having the change that was occurring in South Africa, and then ultimately to have South Africa win the tournament, and Nelson Mandela, and you almost felt as though you were part of history. It really did feel like that.
You got a country that stands out for you, James, away from World Cups that you've loved touring? You've probably been to most of the places.
I've been very lucky. I mean, recently to sign off with Georgia. My daughters gave me one of these scratch-off maps for scratching off the countries that I'd been to, and I have to say that this job has been immense for me, because not only do I now get paid by the SRU, they take me to countries that I would never go to. Been to Argentina several times, the States and Canada, Fiji, Samoa, up to Georgia, out to Romania, the European countries, Hong Kong with the Sevens and with Lions, Australia several times, New Zealand, now to Japan. This is my 3rd visit to Japan. I just never imagined that would ever happen. But if you ask me for one special place, the thing that sticks out for me is Australia and Brisbane. I just find that is absolutely incredible, and the stadium there, it just holds special memories, bizarre memories. Mossy, blooming getting struck by a stray ball. Boys are terrible at just punting balls and not thinking that it might actually come down and hit somebody. And Mossy gets a smack on the head just before the game is about to start. So I had to take him in and get the independent doctors to verify that he was fit to start.
It was 2003 quarter-final. So it was Brisbane, the Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane. And after every warm-up, the last thing I would do, so bear in mind, the warm-ups happened, the team were moving off the field, the last thing I would do would be to stay out and have 2 goal kicks. The 40 metres out, dead in front. And it was almost like, it was in my mind, right, this, for all the warm-up, the kicks, you've done the warm-up, this is it. This is basically try to simulate the first 2 kicks in March. So if you missed it, you didn't get another opportunity. If you missed both, you had to walk in. So it was like a discipline thing. So as I was lining up my second of my 2 kicks, I hit in the side of the face with a stray ball from Ben Hinshelwood, it was at the time. Yeah. As always, Doc never misses a thing. He sees it. I'm flat in the back. Flat. I think, what on earth was that? I've just got this lethargic feeling lying on my back. Gregor Townsend, head coach, who was playing. He was playing centre that day. He runs past. He thought I was joking. He thought I was playing, so he squirts me in the face with water just as James arrives. Tells Gregor to get to, and gets me back to my feet into the medical room. So that's all between the warm up finishing and the game kicking off. But we got back on our feet, and it was a decent night. That
it was a good night. It was a good night, and we were unlucky.
There's a few funny things have happened in Australia, James. There's a certain celebration after a victory on a Tuesday night in Newcastle, which ended up you having to do an awful lot of work.
It's quite funny. You keep talking about memories. You just need this kind of conversation to spark them. That was the famous Glasgow kiss.
Celebration.
Joe Ansborough and Mr. Strokosh, colliding in the huddle. I mean, that was one of the great games. If you think about it, they were almost going to cancel it because the weather was so inclement. It was absolutely pouring down. My boots were full of water before even we got to kick off, just watching the warm up. And for virtually the last kick of the game, penalty, tied 6-6, 9-6. It was just victory in a storm. The guys absolutely overcome and piling into each other, and then Joe Ansborough racing in off the wing, and Strokosh racing in. Both happened to jump up into the air at the same time, clash of heads, and the worst head laceration I've ever seen. Mr. Strokosh, absolutely no problem whatsoever.
Bang heads with somebody who'd be the last man you'd want to bang heads with.
But poor Joe, Yeah, there was a couple of hours putting that back together.
Deprive you of the team celebration?
Well, no. By the time we'd finished in the medical room, the celebrations had died down. I'm going, God, I thought we'd won. There's nothing left. I think I got a can of Coke.
To bring it back to maybe a more serious time, though, Doc, you mentioned it earlier on. I think most of you were injured in the same game as well, with the Tom Evans game against Wales when he had that.
We had several injuries. That was a bizarre game. That was a bizarre game. I mean, Mossy here injured his kidney very, very badly, and that would have been, pardon upon the headline rate. But then poor Tom getting dragged into a tackle with his arms pinned, and I can recollect it to this moment, and it kind of just sets the hairs on the back of your head. And just all credit to the medical staff, and I don't mean our medical staff. We're away from home, we're in Cardiff, and so we have the backup staff from Cardiff, and just the teamwork to get Tom out of that situation and off to the hospital, and then the surgeons at the hospital doing an immense job. But the things that I remember, of course, this happens during a game, and you've got to get these guys off safely. Then you've got to forget about it for a few minutes because you've got the game in hand. But then afterwards, the match doctor coming up to me and just telling me what the diagnosis was and the seriousness, and then me having to search out Max, because Max was playing in those days. And I remember going to Andy Robinson, who was decrying the team at the time for having failed to win, because we came with it, in a contest. And when I told him the outcome, all of a sudden everybody realised that it was just a game, that here we have a fallen rugby player with a very, very serious injury, and that was the imperative. And then finding, Tom's mum and dad, and then getting off to hospital, and not forgetting the fact that we already got Chris with a serious injury. We've got another player with a knee injury, with several injuries that would have actually been normally the headline rate, but Tom's overtook that. And that, that whole scenario showed why the need for training, because we'd just recently started, before that, Scrum Caps, Scottish Rugby Union, medical, cardiac, pitchside skills. Most of the unions now have bespoke courses for teaching people how to look after the whole range of injury. And what you do is you plan for the worst and you hope for the best. And so, we go lots of games with trivial injury, really, and then occasionally something strikes and you have to be ready for it. And that day, I think that we were made ready by the fact that we'd all started doing this training. So that's a very important point.
It's a day, I think, that we always knew we were working with exceptional medics, but it's the biggest day that I've ever been involved in, and you probably didn't know at the time because Tommy was injured at the top of the park. We were carrying on with the game. We held it up as he got off. We didn't know how bad it was. It wasn't until we came off the park afterwards that we found out. But James puts credit onto the other medics as is his want, as the Kirmani is. But we realised we were working with the very best in the world, and Tommy wouldn't be doing what he's doing today if it wasn't for James and his team that day. It was an incredible thing to be part of, an aftermath as well when Tommy came back in pre-England game to say thank you to James and his team was incredibly emotional. And James thankfully put him back together well enough for him to go on and do Strictly Come Dancing. Not very well, but he did Strictly Come Dancing.
But I'm no dance teacher.
There's only so much you can do, James.
I remember in 2015 when he came to visit the hotel, and it was just the embrace you both had. So you must clearly have a great relationship there.
I don't see him for months or years, and then when I see him, it just comes flooding back. And that the Evans family are just such a wonderful family. Two guys who some of the best athletes that I've worked with, and mum and dad, absolutely wonderful people. So. Yeah, no, that's what makes the job special. If you can help somebody who's had a serious illness or a serious injury, and you see them getting back to normal life, and you're just thankful.
So James, to bring it back to slightly more light-hearted affairs, one of the big benefits of being a medic, I would imagine, is that you take containers and containers out full of tape and spray and everything that you need. Now, obviously, they'll get used up over a tour.
Yeah, well, injury cause natural wastage.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the space that's then left in these containers, could be used for all sorts of things.
Additional medical, accoutrements.
Absolutely,
really.
And one of the things I believe that you've managed to use that space for over the years is maybe bringing back a little bit of red wine from Australia or Argentina or some of the other great vineyards around the world.
I remember being called to customs when I came back with a large aluminium crate, and I got pulled off the plane, and they basically x-rayed the medical chest, and they said, can you identify this? And of course we had an ultrasound machine which had a battery in and a lot of workings, and then we had something like 24 odd shaped bottles, and they even in those days they were suspicious of that. And of course I had to open it up and say, look, that's Cabernet Sauvignon, that's a bit of Shiraz. I'm never quite sure how those bottles get in the case, but I'm always thankful when I get back home.
As a player who likes a red wine as well, and there was a few of us, you always knew to look after the medics. So whatever you bought, there was always a spare one tucked away for the medics.
It's kind of a fee for storage. We're transporting, and it's only right that we get some of the contraband.
Right. We're going to have to wrap up, unfortunately, pretty soon.
I'm starting to just warm up, Jamie.
But it's been brilliant. But one thing that away from rugby again, I picked up on with you in 2016 when here in Japan, is that you have a real love for Disney and Disneyland. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're a Disney family through and through. Unfortunately, I mean, there are other theme parks out there, as I said about other things. Don't want to advertise, but Disney holds a special place in our heart. And my eldest daughter, Eleanor's just actually back from Euro Disney. She was away in Paris this last week, courtesy of Dad. I hasten to add, because my youngest daughter's coming out to Japan. My wife and my youngest daughter, Christine and Emma, they have already booked their hotel at Disney for the end of their tour here to ensure that they get to that. I think Emma only has, after that, one other Disney park to get to.
And they've done a bit of work over there as well, haven't they? In America.
In America, I'm trying to persuade Christine that we do need to go back to the States next year. I've got to go to Star Wars Land. I remember Star Wars first coming out, and I was a physio student at the time, and we went to see this. I just remember going down the George IV Bridge, imagining that I was swiping people with lightsabers. I'd never seen a film like this, and so that has a special mention. And to go to the new Star Wars attractions is something that I need to do. I have said. And I just actually, for those back at the SRU, I looked on Cascade last night, and I still have 21 and a half days holiday to take before the end of the year. So I'm just saying you may not see me in December.
3 weeks in Disney.
And I have mentioned to my wife that, she has no holidays left. That doesn't mean that I can't go to Disney.
Oh, Dr. James Robson, it has been absolutely brilliant having you on the podcast. Thank you.
It's been an honour. Thank you.
Brilliant
man, James.
Top man.
James,
and,
thank you.
We'll get you back on in a couple of weeks before you go to Disneyland, or actually maybe after it, to give us a wee review of your holiday.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thanks, Doc.
What a man, eh? Dr. James Robson, what a man.
Brilliant. I really enjoyed that. It's great to get him on the podcast because people, I think, see him and know him from like the Lions documentaries and from things of Scottish Rugby, but he's a very funny man, very intelligent man, but just great to have around, isn't he?
Massive part of everything that goes on. So like every player's connected into him, all the staff, as we say, and a huge character on tour within himself.
Well, obviously, as we spoke about, has been for a long time. I mean, there's not many, certainly players don't have the longevity of the career. Staff and coaches, a huge turnaround, year on year or 4 year cycles, but he's been a constant all the way through, and because he is such a wonderful person and such a brilliant professional. He is. We touched on a couple of them there, but I don't know a player who James hasn't helped get back either, on the field quickly, or from a long-term issue, or from someone outside rugby as well.
Like he's psychological part of it as well.
He's a brilliant doc.
He's a guy that there are tough times, and he's a guy that you would seek out and speak, and we joke about him with his red wine, but. Whether it's an evening where you're, away from the squad and you just grab 10 minutes of his time, he makes a big difference to everybody, as Mossy says.
The other massive influence he's had is on the professionals that have worked for him or under him or with him. Like, because he is so good, he's almost not a trendsetter, because I don't think there's trends necessarily in the medical profession. It's much more deliberate than trends. I think trends may be the wrong word, but like a lot of the physios or doctors try and emulate him or try and kind of follow his lead in a number of things. So that the experience he spoke about getting from other people, the experience that other people get from him, is again absolutely invaluable. And not just in Scotland. He does a lot through Six Nations, through World Rugby, and at the forefront of changing the behaviours around concussion. Is an influential bloke, but more than that, it's such good company, isn't he? Like,
he's got stories that you wouldn't believe. I mean, we scraped the surface there, I think. I can't imagine. I mean, if he was ever to write a book, he's not that type.
Well, I don't know if he was joking, but he did mention the other day that he is writing a book. But I don't know if he's joking. But it'd be a brilliant read if he does bring one. I
suspect he was joking.
I think he'd be joking.
I hope he's not, because I'd love to read that. But no, Dr. Robson MBE, brilliant to have him on the podcast. Now, before we go, lads, around Japan, obviously, it's been a good week here in Nagasaki, but now the attention turns to this week. It's a test week, Ireland on Sunday. Going to be a big game, isn't it?
It's going to be a huge game. Chatting to Gregor yesterday, I think he was talking about the fact that it's unique from a test point of view, or fairly unique from a test point of view, because they've got so much preparation. So they've got extra sessions to be able to put things in that ordinarily with a week's turnaround they wouldn't be able to do. So he feels as if the guys are in a good place. Ultimately, we need to deal with everything else and turn up and put in a great performance against Ireland, get our World Cup off to a good start.
Yeah, it's important, isn't it? I mean, I think you can get too much time as well. I think what was good about the summer build-up was you could tell before the first French game everybody was desperate and needing to play. They wanted to play, they needed a game, and they've almost had that kind of process doubled up because the 4 games happened, then there was a kind of natural cut-off in some ways from the squad selection, the squad travel. And then this is quite a long period between the Georgia game a week past Friday to the game on Sunday. It's a long build-up for the players, and Ireland have that build-up as well, although they were later into Japan than Scotland were. But it's a long build-up for both teams, and whatever happens over the next 6, 7, 8 weeks, however long a year, you just have to make sure that the performances are sensible, are clever. You make good decisions. You rely on your experience. You bring the physicality. You use the energy that a World Cup creates. But you've got to keep a clear head and make good decisions at critical times.
The World Cup yesterday was the welcoming ceremony, so it's officially started now for Scotland. We're all going to be off doing different things this week, but we'll try and meet up next week to look back on the Ireland game. Guys, thank you very much for your time here in Nagasaki, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Thank you, James.
Mark, we're here in Nagasaki. We've been here for about a week now. It's been a great week here. When we look at the relationship we've got with Nagasaki, the relationship over the last 4 years, how has it developed and how has it lived up to your expectations?
I think taking the last bit first, Jamie, it's exceeded our expectations. It's been a wonderful period here, a culmination of 4 years hard work, but 4 years of relationships developing with everybody from the City Council, the Rugby Union, the people of Nagasaki, the schools, the children. It's been universally a success.
And what are the common connections that you see between, the two organisations, but also the two countries?
I think first and foremost, in terms of the love of rugby here, there's no doubt about that. The people love their rugby, they enjoy their sport. In the wider connection, you probably have to go to the historic alliance between Thomas Blake Glover and Scotland, who was the Scottish shogun, as we call it here. He was one of the first people that opened up Nagasaki and Japan indeed to Western influence, and he was a revered figure over here. And yesterday's opening ceremony was in the Glover Gardens, and as a Scotsman, he is revered here. So they know all about Scotland. The people are familiar with that story, and there's a fondness here that probably isn't abroad anywhere else in Japan.
And you mentioned that relationship. It's been 4 years now, a really strong relationship. It's all been building towards this World Cup in Japan, the first one in Asia. But when we think about the future, what's next for this relationship? What do you see happening in the next couple of years with Nagasaki?
Well, I think the bonds are so strong that this will, even if we did nothing, this relationship would endure. But we've got plans to continue cultural exchange trips and sporting exchange trips between ourselves and Nagasaki. The Scottish Government have been involved here building bridges and bonds with us over this period. And because we've been coming here for 4 years, the bonds and relationships are not just skin deep. It's not just 1 or 2 people. There are probably 15 or 20 people on each side of this relationship who will keep this bond between our two communities. So I think this will endure.
Looking ahead to this week, it's Test week. Ireland on Sunday for Scotland. But if we look at the Rugby World Cup in general, how important is it that Scotland are involved in this tournament and for sport in Scotland?
Well, I think every 4 years this is the pinnacle of the world game, and there's a kind of spotlight on rugby generally across the world. It's fully on terrestrial TV in the UK, which makes a difference in terms of the non-frequent viewer will be dragged into the drama. You remember 4 years ago in the quarter-final, it was a talking point for months and months, if not years. So there's always going to be this added focus and added spotlight on our game and our performance. And we need to do well, we need to perform. It's been a 4-year cycle building to this. Greg has been in situ for 2 of those years, and we see this as being 2 years to 2019 under Gregor, and then we're preparing again for the French cycle for 2023. It will be fantastic for the supporter, and I think for Scotland it's a time to test how good we are against the rest of the world.
With the World Cup then, how as a business can we maximise this opportunity from maybe a business point of view or from a sport point of view?
Well, I think the reason we've been here for 4 years was to make sure that people understood what we are all about understand what our values are, understand what's special about Scotland, and it promotes the Thistle worldwide. So we've been consistently across Japan making sure that we're prepared for this visit. Our players are prepared, our coaches are prepared, our support staff from Murrayfield are also prepared. And we've got a series of events both here in Tokyo and in Yokohama, all designed to make the most of any commercial relationships that we've forged over the last 4 years. And in real terms, you'll see events at the British Embassy, events in Scotland House, which are all primed to make sure that people understand the purpose of the visit, the work we've done here. We're not in smashing and grabbing and trying to take money. It doesn't work in Asia generally. But more importantly, we've got real relationships, and we will see the benefit of this over a period of time.
And it's an amazing time for the sport. It's the first Rugby World Cup taking place in Asia. But when you look at the Rugby World Cup and the sport in general, what's your take on it? Where do you see the sport just now?
I see the sport's at an inflection point. It really has to decide how it takes its future forward. We know that there's a significant step change in the finances of the game. You've seen that with the entrance of private equity and the talks around the World Rugby Nations Championship. We are going to find ourselves dealing with a whole new world post this World Cup, and I think Scotland are very well placed to deal with that. I think we understand that new complex world, and what we have to ensure is that rugby remains a tier 1 sport, which means it's a global sport, not becomes a tier 2 sport, because the difference between the finances around a tier 1 sport and a tier 2 sport are colossal. And what we've got to do is to understand that. So as the World Cup finishes, we will go into a really intense period of negotiations around the current deals that are out there for rugby, and trying to make sure that Scotland is central to any debate.
I know the answer to this question already, but is there anything else you can tell us about the changes or any plans in place?
Well, at the moment we're under commercial confidentiality, as you can appreciate, and I can't say too much more, but I think there's enough out there in the marketplace to know that there are sort of generational changing deals that are on the table, and it's up to us to deal with those properly, to harness that revenue, but also to make sure we protect the values of the game and we protect the governance of the sport. Those are the issues that are key to us. It's a balance between money and also sporting integrity, and those are the two things that we're going to try and make sure that we're at the centre of.
And just finally, Mark, mentioned before, the games are about to get underway in the Rugby World Cup here in Japan. What are your hopes and aspirations for Scotland?
Well, I think you have to set a minimum target of getting out of the group. So you want to get through the pool stages. I think we need to not be glib about that either, because we've got some really serious challenges that face us from Japan, from Ireland, from Samoa and Russia. So we can't take that for granted. So we have to fight our way out of the group. And when we get to the quarterfinals, we're in knockout football. We've got potentially South Africa or New Zealand to face. Those are massive challenges. But as we proved against Australia, 4 years ago, anything can happen in knockout football. And we've sent the strongest team we've ever sent from our shores to Asia for this World Cup. And I think Greg will have them really, really well prepared. I think the drama will unfold over the next sort of 4 or 5 weeks. And the longer we're here, the better we'll be.
Mark Dodson, Chief Executive, Scottish Rugby, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jimmy.
That's all from us this week on the official Scottish Rugby podcast. We'll be back next week to reflect on the match with Ireland, plus more exclusive content.